American Football Stories is brought to you by Coach Paint. Coach Paint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. Coach Paint offers the ability to clearly tell a straight video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with Coach Paint today.
What time is it? Game time! It's gonna be special. They're gonna talk about this forever.
Welcome to American Football Stories.
Puts his head down, crashes and spins, and dives. Touchdown!
Bringing together the many perspectives that make up college football in the NFL.
Football is one of the greatest sports ever invented.
From players and coaches.
Believe, baby, believe, baby.
Hey, we playing to win right here, fellas.
To the front office and scouts.
The public is finally beginning to catch up, but they don't even know half the truth.
Us against the world, let's get it.
Your hosts, Robert Parker and Nick Knudsen, bring you American Football Stories.
Welcome to the American Football Stories podcast brought to you by Coach Paint. My name is Nick Knudsen. My co-host is Robert Parker. And today, on March 23rd, 2021, we'd like to welcome a guest, Rian Winter of SportsChat503, to talk some Oregon Ducks football. Ryan, welcome to the show, man. We're fired up.
Oh, man, so am I. Let's go. Pumped up. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey,
No
first
problem.
off, incredible background back there. We did a little chat before the show. We don't have to go over it again, but just want to compliment it. I'm sure the viewers are seeing that for the first time, so that's excellent stuff back there.
Good
But
times.
hey, when I think new money in college football, the Oregon Ducks are really the first team that comes to mind on a national level. But we got to talk. It wasn't always great stuff. We talked about this a little bit before the show too, where you had little blips of success in there, but you had a Rose Bowl appearance in 1957, and then Rich Brooks arrives in Eugene in 1977. And between that period of time, Oregon posted a total of 6 winning seasons. And it wasn't like Brooks got there and the thing just took off. Took some time to build, slow build. He only won 2 games in 4 of his first 6 seasons. That stunned me. You wouldn't get that today. Only 3 winning records in his first 10 seasons. Again, would that happen today? But anyway, so here's my question for you, Ryan. I think most folks outside of the Oregon sphere look at it and at least have the modern bias and will say, like, yeah, Oregon really came up with Chip Kelly and everything. But, I mean, you could make an argument that this foundation really goes back to the Rich Brooks era. And just how is Brooks remembered in Eugene? He left after the Rose Bowl our loss to Penn State in the 1994 season. But I think he built a lot of the foundation for what you see today.
Oh, I agree. You got to give shouts out to Rich Brooks. The field's named after him. It's Rich Brooks Field. But yeah, no, Rich Brooks was a game changer. You know, in that time frame, you talk about that, you know, Len Casanova was the coach. They carried him off the field when we lost against Ohio State. Like, I mean, that kind of showed where Oregon
in the Rose Bowl.
In the Rose Bowl loss,
yeah.
The team carried the coach off the field in a celebration. So, okay, that's kind of where Oregon, just as a metaphor, that's where Oregon kind of has been and is. It just doesn't really have high expectations. You know, I think you have to go, if you want to do a little history lesson, you have to teach it from the perspective that USC and UCLA dominated this league in every sport. In the old days in the NCAA tournament, they had one team come from the Pac-10. It was Pac-8 back then, but only one team. It was UCLA every year. Nobody ever even went to the tournament outside UCLA. So, and that's just basketball. In football, it was USC, dominant. In the 70s, Washington was the dominant team up here. Stanford's always been fairly good. But Oregon State, both of which, never, I mean, when I was a kid, Oregon State played to a 0-0 tie. I mean, when I talk about metaphor, that was 1983. It's literally the bottom of the barrel. Okay, now, I mean, that's incredible. And so to think in terms of where it went and where, you know, in that time frame, you talk about 57 to 97 or 94 or whatever that is. only went to like 4 bowl games. Went to like the Sun Bowl in '64, and then went to like the Independence Bowl in '89. And I'll tell you what, my dad wore that Independence Bowl hat, that 1989 Independence Bowl that we had to actually buy our way into. You talk about new money. We actually went to our season ticket holder and said, everybody's got to buy all these tickets. The only way we're going to get into this game is if everybody bought like 10 tickets for each person, whatever. It just had tons of these tickets, and we went down there and lost. It was freezing. But the point is that Independence Bowl hat my dad wore for years and years and years. So Rich Brooks' era is very important to any of us who grew up in the 80s and saw the history of the whole program. We can't even say how proud we are of where this program has gone, where the athletic department has gone. Autzen Stadium, I'll give you a little history on the O. The O is actually not just an O. It's Hayward Field in the middle. It's a track in the middle, and it's Autzen Stadium on the outside. So it's 2 different shapes that make up the O. And that track field in the middle signifies where it started. It started at Hayward Field. They didn't have the stadium until late 60s, 67. They built the stadium. It was just parking lot around it. Now, there's no parking. Now you have next to it, you have a soccer field. You have 3 football practice fields. You have a baseball field. You have all this other sort of infrastructure built around it. So not only has the program grown, the whole department's grown. The school has put so much more of a focus on academics. And you can go back to a couple different conversations, literally a moment in time where that happened. And one of those times was with Uncle Phil and Mike Bellotti right after that Cotton Bowl loss. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, and first off, it's fantastic. Like, I bet you a lot of people do not know that about the O. That's not just an O.
That's Tinker. That's Tinker.
Right,
that's
from Nike.
Yeah, you better believe it, man. So if you wear Jordans, like we all do out here for the most part, and you like the Nike swoosh, you like the Air Max, a lot of stuff what Tinker was doing is coming from the U of O, who also native son from out here, and ran track. I mean, there's a lot of connections here that are organic. It's not like we're trying to buy our way in. I always kind of make that comment. You talk about new money. People love to say, "Oh, Oregon's buying their way in." I said, if it was that easy, it would have bought a national championship by now.
Yeah, that's what college sports is, though.
If you want to play with the big dogs, yeah, I mean,
gotta have the money. Everyone's got a multi-factor.
So perfect example there. Our competition for all those years was Oregon State.
Yeah,
it was trying to beat Oregon State at the end of the year. We weren't going to a bowl game. Neither of us were. So the idea was to win the bowl game at the end of the year was to win the Civil War game at the end of the year. Once expectations go up to a certain level, they no longer kind of look at the Beavs as being the rival. Then it becomes Washington. Then it becomes some of the other. Then it becomes USC, and then it becomes some of the other teams that you're trying to knock off the big dog.
So we saw this rise in the program really occur under Mike Bellotti, where it just went. I mean, obviously the Rose Bowl is a great way for Brooks to go out. Bellotti was the offensive coordinator for 6 seasons under Brooks. Gets promoted in 95 or 90. Wait. It was a 94 season, 95 Rose Bowl. So 95 was his first season. Ends up being the winningest coach in Oregon history, 12 winning seasons in 13 years. But this is where we really see the birth of really the origins of modern day Oregon football. Uncle Phil, as you referred to, loved that. Phil Knight of Nike, by the way, for those of you who do not know, an Oregon guy, went to school out there, did he run track for the school?
Yeah, for Coach Bill Bowerman. He grew up right here. I live in Southeast Portland. He grew up in my neighborhood. He went to Cleveland High School.
Yeah, and he had a relationship with Bill Bowerman, who was always messing around with the design of shoes. The two of them end up partnering together in some capacity. I read Shoe Dog like 3 years ago, so I'm going back through. Yeah, I'm going back.
Great book.
Yeah, I'm going back 3 years on this. So so ends up partnering with them and developing a monster with Nike, obviously. But Knight comes to Bellotti after the Cotton Bowl loss in his second season and says, "Hey, I really want to do something with this program and Bellotti says, we can use facilities and everything else. So they start investing there. But really, we didn't get to see this as a public until 1999. I actually remember this because I want to say, was it a Thursday night kickoff where they played Mississippi State? Am I mistaken on that? I'm going off top.
It was Thursday night, if I recollect. Yeah,
because I remember watching it in Florida here, and I remember watching those highlighter yellow jerseys, going, "What am I looking at, man?" And it was it was amazing when you saw it, but it was a part of their strategy was to capture the attention of the 18-year-olds that were going to be recruited. And it's worked brilliantly. And not only that, but it's taken root in all of college football.
Yeah, I mean, it came from a very organic place. It really wasn't a plan. It started very organically. You know, let's go back and talk about the Phil conversation. You know, where the Ducks team was in 1994 was a lot of those guys wore Nike shoes, but there was no Nike apparel anywhere. There was no Nike jersey. There was no Nike gloves. There was no Nike football department. You know, they were making football shoes, but they weren't really full throttle into all of the other mechanics of the uniform and everything else, okay? Well, Phil, you know, I think the other thing I don't understand is there's a lot of other donors involved. You know, they talk about T. Boone Pickens, you know, and that's like the only guy they talk about with the Cowboys, you know, and they say, well, same thing with Ducks. It's just Phil. It's not. So there's a bunch of people out here, and there's a bunch of old timber money out here. There's some wealthy people out here, and they have connections to U of O, and at that point in time, college, you know, for years, is a public education and a public institution. Well, they're pretty much almost private institutions now. I mean, there's so much private money involved in these universities across the board. It's changed completely. Mm-hmm. And so this was right as this whole scene was changing. And Phil said to Mike Bellotti, we were really fired up. Okay, let's go back. That Rose Bowl year, the Ducks were 9-3. Okay, the Ducks barely limped into that Rose Bowl. They were gifted it. The last day, UCLA beat USC. Otherwise, it would have been a tie and USC would have gone, or whatever the case may be. So they lost to Hawaii that year, okay, in the year they went to the Rose Bowl. So it wasn't like they were dominant. They were caught fire at the end or whatever. You move forward, and the next year, Bellotti's first year, they looked really good. And they go to Cotton Bowl. And that Cotton Bowl was a big deal because that was kind of like a BCS game or a New Year's Six game now. That the equivalent of like the Fiesta Bowl or something. Mm-hmm. And got beat. And it was very disappointing. And so after that game, because again, as Duck fans, we get so fired up. And then we lose and we're like, oh, the level of defeat is terrible. And so right in that moment after the game, that's when Phil said, hey, what can I do? And it wasn't just him, what can he do? It was, how can I align all the and network with everybody else up here and get this thing rolling? And he said, I need indoor practice facility. That was the first thing. So they built the Mashofsky Center. It's not the Knight Center. And it serves a gigantic purpose for the U of O, not only for game day experience, but also just every single day to be able to create climates and be able to just practice. Practicing in the rain in Oregon's not great, right? So everything starts to change, but the big change is Nike. And when Nike takes over as the official uniform, everything, apparel, everything, for the U of O, it changes completely because go back to the O. Also the green. They were trying to replicate the mallard's head, how it would be reflective. That green that was kind of shiny and turned almost to bluish and purplish and whatnot. They're trying to replicate that. So this all happens. Joey Harrington's a year younger than me. I grew up with him in Southeast Portland. Both went to Catholic school together. Joey is like the face of the program. When that happens, that team, that was the team for us. That was the team that we thought could have been the greatest team of all time for the Ducks. That Fiesta Bowl win. And so that started things. Now, Bellotti's tenure, though, was kind of up and down. Even though he was the winningest coach, in the middle between possible BCS games, he also didn't go to a bowl. And, halfway through that. So not everything was gravy, but
a couple 7-win seasons mixed in there with double.
But he had the foresight to understand, because he originally was the offensive coordinator for Rich Brooks. So when he came into the position, he had the foresight to say, I need to go find the innovative coordinators. And he did. He went through a bunch of different coordinators, and he found Chip Kelly. And when Chip came, it was literally a spaceship. Things changed overnight. It was literally like NASA was doing the countdown. We didn't know what was happening. People were buckling their seatbelts in, and then it was just blast off.
I want to get to Kelly in a second, but I think from a national contract, I'm gonna put this out there: the Joey Heisman billboard. Even though that's a thing that was relatively, you could call it controversial. You could call it, hey, good for them putting the marketing out there across from Madison Square Garden in New York City, big billboard, Joey Harrington crossed out, says Joey Heisman. I really feel like that is the mark of modern day Oregon football being nationally relevant. I mean, he was on the NCAA cover shortly after that, the video game cover for those of us that played that video game. And really that's when Oregon started this whole, that was the beginning of like, oh, Oregon's like this cool program that's got that same rep it's got today. And obviously they built on it. Chip Kelly really took off on that. So first off, do you feel the Joey Heisman moment is a good marker to start the countdown on this era of Oregon football? Where the hell did he find Chip Kelly? How did he find him in New York?
Well, yeah, we'll get into both those. I think it all coalesced at the same time. Again, I go back to the story of Nike and compare it to the story of Nike. And again, you can't compare Oregon's success to Nike's success because Nike's success is like completely outer space. But Nike's just a running company. I mean, Nike, for the most part, is selling to runners, 1970s, early 80s. It gets into the basketball market. Air Force One is a big shoe, 1982, first shoe with Air, sets them apart a little bit, but Nike does not jump until Air Jordan. Air Jordan changed the game. And the year one was fantastic, but year two was not good. Michael broke his foot. They had to go completely retool it. That's when they brought in Tinker. Tinker came in and redesigned. He designed the Jumpman. He redesigned the shoe. No Nike branding on it, no Nike swoosh, no nothing else, all completely different type of materials than anybody else would use. At that same time, they go with Wieden and Kennedy, a Portland company that's a avant-garde company, talking about doing different ads, doing advertising differently. They get with Spike Lee. They do the whole Mars Blackman thing from She's Got It. The commercials explode at the same time. What's MJ doing? Oh, probably his best year of all time, 1988. Explodes. Slam dunk champion. Key moment in time. Literally, the poster has the time on it, right? 3:51, right? This moment in time. All of that happened, and nobody could have seen that happening even just 1 year before when Nike put out the Air Max 1. So it's like what happened in 1987, 1988, 1989 is like radically different. And it sets Jordan line apart from every other shoe that Nike did. That's kind of the blueprint for what they were trying to do with Oregon. They said Oregon does not really have much of a history. It doesn't really have the tradition. It doesn't have the winning tradition for sure. And it doesn't have the branding. It just has a U and an O, an interlocking U and O, and it has the green and yellow. And green and yellow does set us apart a little bit. That there's not a lot of teams that have green and yellow, but it is a boring symbol. It doesn't have any sort of connection. The O was completely a game changer. Like I'm saying, it tells about the story. It says we're a new brand. We're a new symbol. And now you can just show the very corner of that O on SportsCenter with the green and yellow, and you know we're talking about the Ducks. So it's not only, you don't even have the whole O, just a part of the shape, and you still get the recognition. So that all happened at the same time that Joey was there. They got brand new uniforms with brand new funding with Nike, with being good. You can't do that with a 4-win team. They go and they do a great job, and they were able to sustain the success a little bit. Also, then, like you said, the uniform thing started to just go and get crazy. The coolest part about all the uniform thing, though, is that Nike was hip to the fact they brought the kids in and had the kids help design them. So they were doing player involvement real early on, and now we have guys that have gone from there to doing the whole thing and being designers at Nike and now representing who are former Duck players who were in the meeting room with Nike. I mean, so people talk about all these times about, Nike's got all this advantage. They just throw money at people or whatever. That's not the case. These guys have to work for what they have. But it's a pretty cool advantage that you might be able to have being a player athlete and getting to work with the Nike design team in the offseason designing the uniforms. I mean, this season, this uniform combination came out. This is the Ohana look that came out this year to celebrate Polynesian culture. And these guys have been working on it for like 3 years. Well, they brought in all the Polynesian players. What do you want? How do you want it? They went over to SIG Designs to go to Hawaii to ask the guys there, how do you want this to be true to it? So it's not like they're just trying to just be a cartoon. They're trying to do cool stuff, innovative stuff that's relevant, that will hopefully stand the test of time.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff right there, Ryan. And just like you said, that's having that brand. And outside of the field definitely helps that Brandon on the field. And just like you mentioned earlier about, Chip Kelly, Mike Bellotti going out there and finding Chip Kelly, so the Chip Kelly era begins. Bellotti rises to AD and Kelly is promoted to head coach in 2009. And during the stretch, the Ducks revolutionized the way college football looks, both in terms of play and look. You kind of see that trickling over to the NFL game with the read option and the spread option. And, under the Chip Kelly era, 4 BCS bowl games, including a BCS title loss to Auburn, fully established the Ducks as kings of the West Coast and a new national power capable of competing for national titles. So could you tell our audience and just walk through the Chip Kelly era beginning in 2009?
Okay, so we got to go back even before, because he was the offensive coordinator before that. He came in 2007. So again, great stuff, Rob, great stuff. So Chip was a guy who was incredibly comfortable in his position in New Hampshire. He was he's still to this day a very strange individual, to be brutally honest. He's different, okay? And he was comfortable. He had everything he kind of wanted at that point. He didn't really have major dreams or aspirations of doing major different things, right? And they kind of had to coax him to say, hey, try this. When he came out was a very important year, okay? So we had Dennis Dixon, who was a two-sport athlete. At that time, Oregon had not developed the baseball team. So now we have a baseball team. So now, like, for example, our Robbie Ashford, the freshman quarterback for the team, is now playing on the baseball team and doing great. He's like starting center field. He's from Alabama. And so now they have that option. But with Dennis Dixon, they didn't. So Dennis Dixon in this year goes and plays baseball during the summer. And it was incredibly controversial. And all these people love to try to comment on college kids doing stuff. Oh, he should be studying his playbook. He should be doing this, blah, blah. Well, that was this summer that they hired Chip Kelly. And Chip came in and said, no big deal. Go do it. He got to go get paid for baseball over the summer. He got to play minor league ball. He got to kind of see if he could do that. And the whole time, Chip was sending him videos on email and doing everything like we were doing this last year with Zoom. Chip was doing in like 2007. And that was the year that they beat Michigan at Michigan. And it was crazy. Like, it looked like a video game. That was the week after the App State game, so Michigan was rattled. But Oregon put like 38 on them, like nothing. They had the Statue of Liberty play. Dennis Dixon was just kind of like walking around with the ball, like, anybody want to tackle me here? Nobody knew what was going on. And that was that sleight of hand that was, for the first time, we really saw what that mesh point could look like. College football was not doing that mesh point. If they were doing option, everything was stretched. They were not doing anything without reading that corner, that end. And so Bellotti was like, okay, I need somebody who's going to do something different. We had Gary Croton. He left to go to LSU, and they brought in Chip, and he was like, you're going to run the offense. Cool. Chip was like, great. And it literally, he was like, started in a Ford truck and then switched it out for like a Ferrari. And we didn't even know as fans what had hit. We had no idea. And so that year, Dennis Dixon's a Heisman Trophy candidate. He blows his knee out halfway through the year at Arizona, and it's over. And they limp into the Sun Bowl. They have their fifth string quarterback. That was the year South Florida was number 2 in the country. Oregon was number 2 at one point in the country. They met in the Sun Bowl. Oregon wins the Sun Bowl with like the fifth string quarterback. Go to the next year, and it was like, okay, this could be something. And this is the year that the Ducks went to the Holiday Bowl. Jeremiah Masoli he's the next quarterback then after Dennis Dixon, and they start doing some stuff. That year was a really, really productive year for the Ducks. They went and they played Oklahoma State when Oklahoma State had Des Bryant. They beat Oklahoma State in that Holiday Bowl, and that's Chip Kelly's last game as an offensive coordinator. That's Mike Bellotti's last game as the head coach. The next year is the craziest start to anything that we've ever seen. The Ducks are at Boise, the first game. They don't get a first down. I think in the first quarter they didn't get a first down.
It was ugly.
They didn't score. I think they had maybe they didn't score before half. They had a brand new head coach, a brand new athletic director. Mike Bellotti went to be the AD, which was a kind of a controversial move. And it was the first year of Larry Scott, with first year of having the new Pac-12 commissioner. They're all up in the booth, and they're like, is this what we thought this? We thought this was going to be a team that was going to roll. We had just played Boise State the year before, and they'd beat us at Autzen. So it was this huge game of like, oh, you got to go beat Boise State. They beat us, and then the LeGarrette Blount punch happens at the end of it. And this is the first night of college football. Everybody goes to work on Friday. All the talking heads are on ESPN, everything else. It just goes out of control. They rebound that year. They bring it back together, and they go and play in the Rose Bowl that year and lose to Ohio State. And that's another one of those key moments. At that moment after that loss, we all walked out of Pasadena with our heads hung because we thought we could hang with Ohio State, proven we couldn't. And we kind of thought, okay, what do you got to do next? And it literally went even better than that. And it just exploded. And it really changed the dynamics of not only just, like you said, not only just Oregon, but college football. College football looked at this. I remember these comments of like Nick Saban saying, oh, you shouldn't be able to do this. He won a national championship last year doing it, 2 years ago. The same thing, right? Look at what's Sarkisian doing that's that much radically different. I mean, they're still doing that mesh point because the whole point was Chip Kelly said, we're just going to simplify it. These are college kids with a lot of pressure on them running a really, really crazy offense that sometimes involves hundreds of pages. Chip Kelly went back and dusted off the original, like, Carlisle Indians playbook from like the original Pop Warner, like 100-year-old plays that nobody's running anymore. And before he threw the football, he was using these old running plays that nobody's been using, and they was running the play over and over and over and over and over. They'd run the same play 14 times in a row.
The speed at which they executed was a lot. So if you look at the similar offenses around that time that were kind of the Urban Meyer with Utah and Florida, and then Rich Rod at West Virginia was unbelievable at the time. But Oregon's had a different look to it. You had the different jet, like they'd have more jet motions. I feel like they'd have more going on before the snap. They definitely moved at a faster pace, even though those other schools moved. But it was just you couldn't even show a replay during an Oregon game.
No.
That's what was mind-boggling from what I recall.
Yeah, and it's kind of like one of those things where if you think about your whole game, if you play football, and you know anybody who's gone through that position of playing football, you're like, why couldn't we play the whole game like we did the last 2 minutes? We played like we had our hair on fire the last 2 minutes, scored 2 touchdowns, stopped them from doing it. Why didn't we play the whole 4 quarters like that? And that's kind of what Chip's mentality was. He was like, well, if you have all this pressure on you to score, why not do that to begin the game? And he'd get the first touchdown and then go for 2 on the very first touchdown. Because he said the game might come down to 1 point. We just got that 1 point in the first possession. Like, he was just one of those guys who just ran a kind of a different way to do it. He's a tight end by nature. And I think that, he kind of thought like a tight end. Like, all we need is 3 yards. We might break this one for 5 or 6. Might break it for 70. The other big thing that Oregon had going for it was it opened the door and was very creative with players that other universities just weren't willing to be creative with. DeAnthony Thomas is the best example. DeAnthony Thomas still to this day is getting Oregon recruits. The kid from New York, Seven McGee, is a huge talent. Number one thing he says over and over is, I love DeAnthony Thomas. I'm going to be DeAnthony Thomas. Cross Patton, Big Boy's son from Outcast. I've talked to Cross a couple times where he's mentioned that and says, hey, DeAnthony Thomas is the guy breaking the tape at the, Fiesta Bowl, doing all this. He was the coolest dude. And I saw him as a freshman. I talked to him as a freshman. I said, I've never seen a more dynamic freshman in my life. He got the ball on like the first punt return and was just gone. I was like, I've never seen anything like this. And USC was going to have him be a corner. He was already hooked into USC. And they were like, yeah, how much talent does USC have to where they can tell DeAnthony Thomas that he's going to be on the defensive side? They're going to dictate the terms for him. And he said, hey, I want to run the ball. Chip Kelly said, you can do anything. We'll throw you the ball. You can run the ball. You can throw the ball. You can kick the ball, whatever. So I think there's a couple of things going on there. Also, there was some, the recruiting now different than the recruiting then. That all that success in the Chip Kelly era, there was maybe 1 5-star. Maybe. I mean, there was all 2 and 3 star kids for the most part. Some 4 stars mixed in there, but it was not high-end recruiting talent. It was kids that came in with a chip on their shoulder.
we're gonna get
kids that came in with a chip on their shoulder, and they could not stand the fact that USC passed them up, and they couldn't wait to play USC. And we came with that. And there were some really good players like that. Well, Michael James is one of those guys. Right? Michael James, I think, still has the chip on his shoulder that he didn't get recruited by Texas, or didn't recruit, get enough love from the schools that they wanted to go to as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely a conversation that we're going to dive into later on, Ryan. But I just want to get back and just talk about Oregon football on the field. And could you just talk about, how big of a loss that was, the national championship game to Auburn? Could you just tell our audience and just go back and just, relive those moments and, everything that was surrounding, the campus, the players, the coaching staff in regards to that national championship game?
Well, first and foremost, I thought it was a real chance. Pac-12 doesn't get much love. Pac-10, Pac-12. We're dealing with it right now with the tournament. They reseeded the tournament on ESPN, and they put all the Pac-12 schools in the bottom end of the seeding. They only lost one game in the whole thing, like 8-0, 9-1, or whatever. Anyway, it's because they just don't get to see them. Our games come on at 10 o'clock your time sometimes. And we're on channels that nobody sees. Pac-12 Network, nobody gets. Pac-12 Network. So it's like there's some things we're going up against. When we had that opportunity, BCS, we thought of it really like we were covering for our whole conference. And it was a chance for us to play the SEC. I mean, nobody in the Pac-12 chants Pac-12 at games. These guys were chanting SEC in the parking lot, okay? So getting to go up against play Cam Newton, absolutely unbelievable talent, right? And there's some huge heavyweights on that line too, right? And we thought this is going to be insane because, again, when you're coming from a perspective that I have, I'm not trying to think only green and yellow glasses here. I was like, these guys are the real deal. They just went undefeated in the SEC. I was like, this is going to be insane. And so we went there. We were there. I twisted the heck out of my ankle that morning, the game. I was trying to pick up jogging as a New Year's resolution that lasted for about a week. I'm in Scottsdale looking at the mountains, it's cactus and everything. I was like, oh, that's great. Whoa! Rolled my ankle. Anyway, so I was in a strange spot.
He's
personally
already making excuses for the game.
Not making an excuse for the team, but but we were hyped. The whole Duck fan. I mean, we were there. We felt like we were climbing to the top of the mountaintop, and then the way the game worked out was just so surreal. The fact that we probably played them better than anybody else played them the whole season defensively, held the team down to the point total that they had them to, and then at the very end, that last run where they get to the 2-point conversion, throw it to Jeff Mail in the end zone to tie it, it was surreal. I mean, it was absolutely a surreal moment. I think we're tied with 2 minutes to go, and we have a big thing about, Dyer was down. You can't make it about one play, but there was just such a weird dynamic, and you could kind of feel that whoever was going to have the ball last was going to win, and that's a game where it feels like, it's a really tough situation because both teams played really good, and both teams were undefeated. It was a really big game for that perspective, I
don't think that national championship game gets enough love because that came down to the last second. But I think it was like one of those games where you expected really a shootout, and it ended up being a defensive struggle. And I think people were a little disappointed from an optics standpoint with it, even though the game itself ended up being a fantastic game. Yeah, I mean, the play of the game is probably Casey Matthews punching the ball out from Cam Newton on the sack to turn the ball over to get the Ducks to have the chance to score late. And again, how would that be the greatest play of the game? I mean, people were looking for so much more. I think to this day, it's one of the top 2 or 3 highly watched events on cable television history. It set a number that I don't know if it's been. I think it has been maybe, but maybe there's only 1 or 2 games that have had more viewership. So it was a crazy game. It felt like, though, as a Duck fan, it felt like we were still going to be relevant for the next. It didn't feel like we were going to drop off. And it felt like we were going to be relevant for the next, 5 to 6 years. There was some really good young talent on that team that was coming up. And we knew what was going to happen coming forward. We thought more recruits would be coming in. We thought the program was going up. So it wasn't like it was that
huge of a negative at the end of that game. It was like, hey, they played hard. We lost to the best team in the SEC that went undefeated. You can't hang your hat. You can't hang your head about that. I mean, tried your best. Yeah. But we really thought that was going to be a springboard going forward to greater success. And I think it has been, but not the payoff that we thought it was going to be.
And Ryan, I just want to jump back in and talk about, paving the way to greater success. And just like you mentioned earlier, you talked about Anthony Thomas getting recruited to USC to play, defensive back. But everyone kind of knows the USC story with the Reggie Bush, the sanctions and everything like that. How big has, the downfall of USC helped not only Oregon, but other teams in the Pac-12 as well?
Oh, I think big time. I think that if you go back in time, USC is the flagship. So if USC's on their game, I don't think anybody in the conference can really hang with them. I think there's schools like right now, I think Oregon and Washington are both really, really strong football schools. I think Stanford is David Shaw, I just have so much respect for him, and I think what they do is fantastic. But everybody else, basically, right now, ASU, I would say, is on the rise up with Herm. But every other school in the conference is kind of up and down. SC every single year gets picked in the top 25. No matter who's coaching, no matter who's there, it's every single year. If the preseason top 25, USC is on that thing every single year. So, having them be down, but I don't think it all comes from the sanctions. I actually tend to think that there's a bit of a vibe at USC that it kind of permeates that whole. Their basketball team is playing well, but I feel like it permeates their whole athletic department. The tagline on the West Coast is that's the University of Spoiled Children, and there's an arrogance I feel like that they are so dominant, or they have that ability to be so dominant that I think they kind of sleepwalk through some games. They get caught early against Stanford. Stanford usually schedules them in the first Pac-12 game. That's usually always tight. They don't come out and like just roll teams, and they did during the Pete Carroll era for sure, but they haven't since. And Oregon has had a great track record against them, especially down there, especially in LA. And last time we were down there, they were chanting overrated because the USC was up by a touchdown in the first quarter. They were chanting overrated. The Ducks ended up winning by like 25, almost 30 points at the end of the game. It was crazy. There was nobody left in the Coliseum but Duck fans at the end. So there's kind of a disillusionment, I feel like, with their fan base. They hate Clay Helton. They want Clay Helton to be so they can't stand that guy, most of those people, and yet he wins just enough to keep his job every year. Mm-hmm. There's a strange thing going on there where I just don't feel like they play up to the expectation. And what you saw in the 90s when they dropped off was literally every single school in the Pac-12 had a chance to go to the Rose Bowl, or they did. Every single one had. The Beavs didn't go to the Rose Bowl. They went to the Fiesta Bowl against Notre Dame. But every single school had the chance to win the conference in a 10-year period. That's pretty crazy to think about, in the 10 years between USC winning it. So USC gets some great talent every year. They're an NFL machine. If you look at the NFL production in the conference, they're the number one school for sure every single year, putting out NFL talent. But I feel like they just kind of sleepwalk through their season a little bit. They expect to win every single game. So, I don't know. I feel like the Ducks have to play really hard, and they play really hard down there, and it's really evident when they play against each other, because most of the time the Ducks are dancing at the end of that game.
Yeah, that's some awesome stuff right there, Ryan. And another thing I wanted to point out is that we're really seeing a trend of the LA kids actually, leaving the state. You guys have a 5-star recruit at that defensive end spot in Kevon Thibodeau. So is that a trend that you're just seeing with Oregon, kids leaving the LA area and just going to Oregon, or do you see that within the Pac-12 as a whole?
Oh, I think you see it across the board. I think there's I don't know. I'm not that hip to the high school recruiting, but it feels like to me there's about 5 or 6 different real mega centers of high school population, right? Southern California and the West Coast, obviously Texas, you could probably break up into a couple different regions. And then you have between Texas and Florida, right? Everybody want to kind of claim their own little piece, right? Atlanta, people in Georgia, people down in Louisiana, or whatever the case may be. But for the most part, we only have real one epicenter of player talent out here on the West Coast. Now, there is another center that's starting, which is Phoenix. Phoenix is starting to change. The demographics are starting to change a little bit. A lot of population moved down there in the last 30 years, and that's becoming a little bit of a hotbed as well. But you got to pilfer that talent. It's the only way to be successful on the West Coast. You'll see Steve Sarkisian. He said that one of the first things he said when he got to Texas. He said, I'm going to Southern California, reestablish that, because there's a lot of kids down there, and not all of them want to play for the local school. The big thing is people want to get out of the neighborhood, especially a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau. He grew up right down the street from the Coliseum. If you've been to the Coliseum, you know you might not want to live in that neighborhood long term. The goal would be to move from that neighborhood. No offense to the neighborhood. But the goal is bigger and better things, right? Upward mobility. And these guys see these different opportunities out there. You know, when colleges come knocking to these kids, they see it as like an opportunity to work at a Fortune 500 company. I got this company asking for my job. I got this company asking for my job. I got this. Which one am I going to pick? They all want me. You know, and you got a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau. He was the #1 recruit in the country, just an absolute freak athlete off the edge. And, you know, by him choosing Oregon, he decided, I want my own path. I want to move away from Los Angeles, stay on the West Coast, be close enough, get to a different spot. What's crazy is these kids from Los Angeles who grew up in Los Angeles, when they come up to Eugene, it's a completely different world. Like, environment, people, places, everything is different. And so it's a unique situation. Where else are you going to get that in your life? And I think there's oftentimes an expectation for kids to go to the quote-unquote local school or even the best school in their region. But a lot of these kids want to go on an adventure and go play somewhere else. And so why not? But yeah, Oregon has always recruited Southern California. If it only recruited the state of Oregon, we'd be competing against Portland State. I mean, the state of Oregon has grown over time for sure, but we produce about maybe 10 to 15, 20 Division I athletes a year. It's not high-end talent. And we do have great players who come from here. Don't get me wrong. Justin Herbert just came out of here. Brady Breeze coming out of here. Keith Brown, a great linebacker coming out. There's a lot of great players coming out of here. But Elijah Molden, but he went to Washington, right? I mean, there's some great players coming out of here, but you can't field the whole team on it.
Yeah, and to your point of view, we have one of our special friends on the show in Jordan Scott, and he's a Florida guy, and he pretty much shared those same sentiments as saying, hey, he kind of viewed Oregon as, you know, the Disneyland of football, and he just said, hey, you know, he grew up watching the DeAnthony Thomas, the LaMichael James, you know, the Marcus Mariotas of the world, so that kind of intrigued him to kind of make that move from you know, the East Coast all the way out there to the West Coast. And he said he loved it. But one thing that he did emphasize, that it was a little culture shock from what he know in Florida, you know, waking up and seeing the sunshine to going out there in Eugene. So I think you're spot on in that regards, Ryan, as far as these kids just want to up and move and just kind of, you know, go on an adventure and just see new things. So, and Oregon definitely brings the best out in everything, and definitely having Uncle Phil in the background definitely helps that too.
I mean, our love for Fat Mac is through the roof, man. That guy is a legend, will be for all time. I got a good relationship with his family. Man, that guy is an absolute legend. Came out here without even a visit.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, no, he's one of those guys who, you know, again, that would not have opened the door had that Willie Taggart. We probably are getting to that point now talking about it, but as a smooth transition, when the Helfrich era ended, so did the Mike Bellotti / Rich Brooks era. I mean, it went that far back. You had staff members that had been there for 35 years. So when that era ended, when Helfrich ended, it was a clean break. They literally moved everybody out and brought in a whole new crew.
Can we talk about Helfrich real quick? Because that just seems like such a blip on the radar now. But how much did
that one hurt?
I felt like it was under the radar. And obviously Helfrich, good success, made a national championship game, only had one losing season. Right, seemed like a good guy from the outside. But how much can you give us like a 2-minute or even 30-second synopsis on what happened with the Chip Kelly NCAA recruiting issues?
Oh, like the Willie Lyles stuff?
What's the 30-second explanation for people outside?
So everybody thinks everybody's dirty and everybody's trying to pull everything. We had one player Lance Seastrunk, who went to Baylor after Oregon, had some good success running back. 5-star kid. Again, it was that era where he was one of the higher rated recruits we had. And he came with this baggage that Willie Lyles had connected his mom to, maybe his mom signed the recruitment and not him, or letter of intent, or whatever the case may be. And there was some money that they thought had exchanged hands, that we gave Willie Lyles money to give them, and Willie Lyles was like working as like a consultant for the team or something, and he was a player, rep or agent or whatever, quote unquote, somewhat you call it that, trying to align guys. He was an aligner, I guess you could call him, guys trying to set guys up to different colleges. It really didn't set us back that much because there wasn't that much there.
So
I mean,
not much of an impact on the Helfrich era.
I mean, no, what the Helfrich era, the really big thing there was, I'm not saying that it like ran out of steam, but Helfrich was a great guy, really nice guy, but I don't know if he was really the head coach material when it came to running an entire program. A lot of guys had been there a long time. Not that guys were comfortable, but they were used to doing things the same way. I'll give you the perfect example with recruiting. With recruiting during that time, they pick and chose the players that they wanted, and they went after that one player. This time right now, it's literally a machine gun of offers. They're offering everybody because they're trying to get the best players, and they realize that everybody else is doing that. Oregon was never doing that. Oregon was doing it the same way they were doing it in the 80s and 90s in the 2000s. They had not evolved. And one of the big things about Helfrich was, that Marcus Mariota year, you want to talk about the national championship that really hurt, that one, because that was probably our best look at it. We had just come off a huge win against Florida State. Marcus is the Heisman Trophy winner, and you've got this set up with Ohio State, who at that point in time was on the third-string quarterback. We know the story. And losing that game was deflating. I mean, that was literally a kick. I mean, that was so tough to take. That was a dark time. Even though the program felt like it was really strong, it felt like it was moving forward, it was the exact opposite feeling of losing to Auburn. When we lost to Auburn, it was like, oh, we'll be back. We lost to Ohio State, it was like, it's over. I don't see this Humpty Dumpty getting back off the wall on this.
Good luck replacing the guy like Marcus Mariota.
Good luck replacing the energy of that whole thing. I mean, that whole thing, coming off a Heisman Trophy, we've had one in the entire history of the program. And
not to mention that win over, by the way, that win over that Florida State team. That was a great Florida State team.
This is the first year that they did the 2 games.
Right, the playoff.
So in previous history, we play Florida State. We win with a gigantic win. This was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was awesome. Instead, we do this thing where a week later, we got to play. And in that week time, our wide receiver gets busted with weed. Something is legal now across the whole West Coast. He got busted with some weed and got kicked out of the championship game. This Darren Carrington, he was the MVP of the Rose Bowl, offensive MVP the week before.
I don't remember that detail.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't remember that.
Starting wide receiver who was just an absolute baller. He went to Utah and played and had a great run at Utah.
Could he tackle Zeke Elliott?
My point is, Ohio State is like the Yankees. Ohio State is that team. And when we went up against them, when we saw them we knew it was either them or Bama. And as soon as we beat up Florida State, we were like, yes. Oh, no. We got to play one more game against these guys.
Well, you had to be fired up that Bama lost. Because that was a crazy upset.
It was the best of the 2 options, but still Ohio State was a steamroller.
Yep.
Yeah. That team was
hot. Look, hey, the 4th string Ohio State quarterback just won the Heisman Trophy winner with 2 years ago, right? The transfer transferred out.
Yep.
I mean, it's just Joe Burrow. So it's just crazy to think about the gluttony of talent that they have there, that the guy who can't even play on the field is going to go and be the amazing player that he is. Anyway, so losing that game was brutal. The next year, though, we had Vernon Adams come in from Eastern Washington, and this guy played 1 year at Oregon, And I will guarantee that he is if he's not top 5, he's top 10 best quarterback we ever had. This guy's electric.
A lot of hype with him, too.
He never lost a game at Oregon. As soon as he got hurt, they lost. In the bowl game, this was the famous bowl game against TCU where they were up by 30 points at halftime. He goes out with the thumb injury. They lose in triple overtime. They couldn't even hike the ball at the end of the game. So the end of that game, compounding with the end of the previous year national championship, was a absolute hot seat that electrified Helfrich. The next year, we still didn't have a quarterback to replace Mariota. We brought in another grad transfer, Dakota Prukup. Well, that's the year that Herbert's a freshman. Prukup couldn't handle it. They end up losing a couple games close early on that could have changed the season. It didn't. We put Herbert in his first game against Washington the year Washington went to the playoffs. They just destroyed the Ducks. They scored 70 points on the Ducks. I mean, it was brutal. And that year was so bad. And then at the end of the year, they lose to the Beavs. Like, it couldn't get any worse. It was back to beat the Beavs. Didn't even go to a bowl game. And that was it. It was as soon as they lost to the Beavs, I was at that Corvallis game. We walked out of that field. We were like, all right, that's it. I walked out with Pharaoh Brown, who's a tight end now in the NFL, Texans. And I was like, hey, I said, is Coach done? He's like, yep. He's like, because he was already done. He'd already been injured. He was already in street clothes. He wasn't even with the team. He was just walking out of the stadium. It was, I'd never seen anything like it. And so they brought in Willie Taggart.
Which,
and then here we are.
By the way, Willie Taggart coming in. Right now in 2021, the name Willie Taggart's not carrying the same weight that it had. But I thought that was an absolutely fantastic hire at the time because he did wonders at Western Kentucky, did wonders at USF. But his MO was he kind of tore it down and then built it back up. And when he got his guys in there and it was his system, it could take off. And I thought he was just a perfect fit for Oregon. But he was there for one season, and there was some positive momentum. Jordan actually mentioned that there were 8 guys that came out to Eugene from Florida. Right. Like, so, because Jordan's St. Pete guy knew Willie Taggart from the USF days, had a connection there. So, look, I mean, you got a guy now with national recruiting reach that is familiar with a bunch of parts of the country that's done 2 awesome rebuilds. And you guys must have been fired up. But what was his one season like at Oregon? I know it was kind of getting back. Not a lot of expectations on it, I remember. And there were the ups and downs, but there were a lot of positives I felt like that came out of that season.
Sure. Yeah. You saw the writing on the wall that, it was just going to be, like you said, a rebuild. And I don't know if a lot of Duck fans were prepared for that. I think there was a lot of resentment. There was I don't know if it was half. There was a pocket of the population that thought you should have never fired Helfrich and just run it back and they would have rebounded and everything would have been back to normal. There were other people that the whole year was like, fire Helfrich, this is ridiculous. So there was actually a divide within the fan base as well. That it historically was not there.
I didn't know that you mentioned guys who've been there for 35 years. I didn't realize there's that much continuity from Brooks to I mean, It sounds like Taggart coming in is a major, major shift.
I mean, humongous. I mean, you had guys, Gary Campbell, been there, since the 80s, had literally coached every great Oregon running back since, Derek Lavelle and Latin Berry. I mean, he had all of them all the way from there to DeAnthony. So anyway, you had a bunch of other guys who played there. Don Pelham played there. Steve Greatwood played there, linebacker coach, offensive line coach, and been coached there since the 80s, 90s. So you had so much continuity. You had a tremendous amount, and it was difficult. It was difficult to come in and say, we're doing something totally new, and we're bringing in guys from Florida. Because it wasn't just Taggart. You had Levitt come from Florida. You had Cristobal come from Florida. You had all these other guys who had Florida connections come out here. And it was, again, we are Duck fans. You could have Satan be the head coach, and you'd have people be like, "Go Ducks." Okay, they'd be like, "Hey, well, he's really intense, but gets the guys fired up." And so you're always trying to look at the silver lining, right? And so we thought, hey, this was going to be great. Young, he's got the Harbaugh connection. Harbaugh was really hot at that time. He had been, like you said, very successful at his previous 2 stops. And, it was just a great situation. And I think he actually would have stayed had the Florida State job not opened up. And what had happened was the Florida State job opens up. And when the Florida State job opens up, he can't say no. And it was too good of an option, even though they sold him a bill of goods that was not great. They sold him the house on the river that floated away. And it turned so bad so fast. You guys know, as Gator fans,
Yep.
I mean, nothing was sweeter probably to watch that thing tear down like a forest fire, because it started as soon as Jimbo saw it halfway through that last season, right?
Hey, ever since Jimbo's Christmas tree hit the curb, it's been a different deal out there in
Christmas
Tallahassee.
tree.
But like, it's hey, that you want to talk about something that fell apart pretty quick. But hey, as Gator fans, we were searching for our next Tebow we were in the wilderness for a decade. So
sure,
you just got to appreciate it's why we just had a 10-win season here in Gainesville. I mean, you got to appreciate the good seasons when you have them. And, everyone's angry. We won 10 games in Gainesville this year. Everyone's pissed off right now. Sure. So it's like it's almost no healthy perspective on what just happened over the last decade. But you talk about Taggart called FSU his dream job. He's originally a Florida guy. He grew up rooting for the Noles, he claims, everything. Big family connection there. But I don't know, man. When his name first came up, I was like, okay, I get there's some kind of connection there, but dude's at Oregon. And like, I guess because I was in high school, I graduated high school in 2005. So like, I was in college and high school when Oregon was coming up, and I look at Oregon as a nationally relevant program, tons of money, great facilities, better than what you have at Florida and Florida State, by the way. Florida State have done some catching up over the years, but at the time, definitely better. And you got the Nike backing, like, okay, so you had a personal connection to FSU. How shocked though were you that he still left?
Oh, we were all shocked. I think that was
Crystal Ball still gets mentioned for jobs, because it's almost like the national media almost talks about Oregon like they're a stepping stone job to some degree, and I don't understand that. I guess what's your take on that?
I agree with that. I don't think the national media understands Oregon. I think like you said before, I think USC is the flagship in the West Coast, and outside of that, I don't think the national media pays much attention. I think
crazy.
It's crazy. I think Washington is a fantastic. I think any of these jobs on the West Coast. I think being the head coach at Cal. I mean, if you could be the head coach at Cal and be successful, why would you leave? You're Strawberry Canyon. I mean, what are you talking about? You're in the Bay Area. You're in Berkeley. Like what anyway, but I'm biased because I'm a West Coast guy. But I also think all these other jobs. I mean, think about the Lane Kiffin thing with Tennessee. They were furious. They were furious at the thought that Tennessee was a stepping stone.
Yep.
That was more insulting to the Vol fans than anything else. They were more upset with that than even the loss of Kiffin. So I think with the idea with Taggart, Duck fans were just really pissed that he left, and they felt that maybe it wasn't all on the up and up, and they weren't being transparent or whatever. But nobody is, right? I mean, remember Saban with the Dolphins? When he gets the Dolphins interview, I will not be.
No, that's always such an unfair thing that we hold our coaches to, that we don't do in our own personal lives. Like nobody does that when you're changing jobs. Like, hey, by the way, I'm interviewing somewhere else. Looking, hoping I get this job so I get the hell out of here. Yeah, like. But Rob Jordan was talking about that the players were going back and forth in the locker room. Even the guys in the locker room were like, he's going, he stayed. Like, people didn't have a firm vibe on it. And it was like kind of a stunner when he left. And it was in that weird week where it was like the dead week, the week after the last game, but before the
bowl game. We had the first bowl game of the year that year with the Vegas Bowl, and all this recruiting was all messed up because of that bowl game, because you had to have that early time. Usually the coaches are all out. Now they had to be back, and they had to be practicing and everything else. And it was during that time that this all went down.
So, I loved what Jordan called it. He said they all went crystal ballin' for hashtag crystal ballin', and they really had an internal push, and you see really mixed results. I mean, we talked about a guy in Helfrich when you were describing the steam that went out of the engine a little bit with him. I was getting Larry Coker vibes when you were talking about that. And you talk about a guy that gets pushed on internally from the staff. Another Miami Hurricane guy here, Mario Cristobal. Hey, he actually had some experience at FIU as a head coach. Part of the Saban rehab clinic of coaches, did his time in Tuscaloosa. But, man, it feels like he might be the poster child for the Saban school of coaching, outside of maybe him and Kirby Smart might be his two better assistants as head coaches right there. But I would even give Cristobal a notch up, because the situation he inherited, it's almost like Willie Taggart didn't even happen at this point, because Cristobal just came in. It was a seamless transition.
Yeah, especially with the rest of the staff. Levitt stayed for another year after that, and then there's been a lot of continuity that's been there, even though guys have left. But no, Mario's a different guy, man. He is one of the more genuine people I've ever come across who's in this position. I've met and talked with every one of these coaches we're talking about, and Mike Bellotti was probably the most polished of all of them. Chip was just like I'm saying, he was kind of a strange guy. He would kind of move through the room as fast as he could. He'd kind of put his head down and have his little coffee cup and walk right through the whole room. Not really there to shake hands and kiss babies, where Bellotti was more like a politician. He'd walk the room. He would talk to everybody. Bellotti came up to Portland every single week and did the Portland Duck Club meeting. And Chip was like, no more. We're not doing that. I'm not going up to Portland for that. And Chip cut off a lot of the communication back and forth that Bellotti, glad-handed a little bit more. Cristobal has put into place all of those things. Not the same level of coming up to Portland that much, because now they do it all via internet or whatever. But he's brought a lot of stuff back. He reminds me of Rich Brooks. He is not necessarily the greatest coach, but he's a great recruiter. The guy is a dog on the recruiting trail. And that in modern day football is going to keep you in most games. You can work your way around a little bit. You can have an offensive coordinator get hot like we had with Chip. You can find somebody else maybe to run a defense or something. But, man, he is a absolute game changer. And I tell him every time I see him almost, I'm like, Coach, you're pumping me up. Every time I hear him talk, every time he talks to me, I want to hit the weight room. He just makes me want to, just get bigger. And that's his motto. He's like, and every time he's like, well, let's do it, bro. And he's a funny guy too. He's just a regular guy. His first year was as the head coach at one of the Duck coach dinners. He's walking through, and he just we're all sitting there as a group of guys just talking, BSing like a tailgate. He just walks right up to us and was like, hey, how do I get the lanyard? Where do I get that? And he's just asking us as we're there early. And we're like, I think it's over there, Coach. At the introduction to, oh, thanks guys, just a total regular guy, where a lot of these guys aren't. A lot of these guys are heavy ego guys. And that's the difference between these guys being able to go into a front room with these family members and get these family members on board. If you talk to any of these recruits, they'll all say it's a family affair. My mom, everybody's super happy with it. Everybody's close to the coaching staff. They all call. They keep, connections, and that's the difference. So we love Mario, man. He pumps us up.
Hey, and just to illustrate your point, going through the Rivals team rankings from 2002 under Bellotti to 2017 under Taggart, Oregon's recruiting classes finished 22nd on average. A lot of things in the 40s, a couple of 11, but 22nd on average. One top 10 finish in 2011, 9th under Kelly. But since Mario Cristobal has taken over, classes finished top 10, 3 out of 4 recruiting classes, including 4th place in the most recent one in 2021. But you got 9th, 7th, and 13th. So we're really we've seen the rise of Oregon football to national awareness, then national prominence with actually getting to a couple national title games. And this is the first time we're really seeing Oregon put together those elite recruiting classes. And I know one of the things they talk about with Cristobal coming from the Alabama days, and the guy played on national title teams in Miami. He's been around a lot of great football teams, but the guy knows how to recruit in the trenches too. So he's really made that a priority. Whereas the West Coast, I know the SEC fans, you look at Pac-12 football, wide open, a little bit soft on the lines. An average SEC fan would tell you, but that's not so in Eugene.
Right. No, he's old school, dude. He wants to line them up and smack them, man. He wants his linemen big, and he wants the splits to be narrow. He wants them to be able to run through a brick wall. Chip Kelly was a completely different philosophy. Chip Kelly's teams led the country in rushing. They were a running team, and they ran the hell out of it. But they ran it like they did 100 years ago. Cristobal runs it like they did in the early 70s. Just straight bulldozer. And he has some road graders up front. And, I mean, he's had some serious players up front. And I think some of the better linemen in the country are looking at Oregon as an opportunity to hone their craft under a head coach that's a lineman. Not many head coaches out there that's former linemen. Okay, look to like John Madden, some of the classics, right? But like, dude, not many guys see the perspective from the line first. A lot of quarterbacks are coaches, a lot of other players, right? But the big offensive linemen, you don't see that many of them, but you used to. You used to see a bunch of offensive linemen. They used to talk about the offensive line and be like some of the smartest guys on the team, right? Stanford, in the NFL or whatever, they always had stud linemen. So he is looking at it from the perspective of, hey, we got to get big, got to get strong, we got to be able to run the ball, and then athletes want to come play on a team that can handle that kind of football. Because the big thing about Oregon was couldn't play with the big boys, couldn't match up against Auburn, couldn't match up against Ohio State, size-wise in the trenches. And they were right. Marcus was running for his life against Ohio State. Hell, we talk about Zeke Elliott. Talk about those linemen, those linebackers all went to the NFL. That Ohio State team had like 15 guys go to the NFL off that damn boy. I mean, we're talking, that's amazing. We had like 4. We had Eric Armstead and DeForest Buckner, who are great players. But, I mean, it's like, dude, Marcus is a, backup. We're talking Cam Newton's still a starter. It's a different level of team. So, I mean, it's just, I think the bigger thing is going forward, what Cristobal brings is a real hope that you're going to get to a sustained level. My dad always talks about recruiting classes are great, but you have to stack them up. And if you don't stack 3 or 4 of them up together, it's not worth a damn. You can have one, but that's not doing anything for you. And so you got to be able to go 3 or 4 in a row. And they've done, I think Cristobal's 3 or 4 years now have been the top 3 or 4 years of Oregon recruiting ever. Yeah. Like every year hits the best. And then he keeps telling us next year's better. Next year's better. And that's the difference, is also that they're recruiting at such a high level that then now it's interesting to those top 10 top tier talent are actually putting them on their, Instagram, where they have their top 15 or whatever they have now. The Oregon O is on every one of those.
Two Pac-12 titles in last 3 seasons. That's not a bad thing to push too. You're going to be in the hunt. Yeah,
definitely not a bad thing to push. And it really seems like Mario Cristobal is going to be there as long as he wants to be there, Ryan. By the way, just like you said, we all know he's a great recruiter. But I just want to dive down into our NFL draft preview and stay in the trenches and talk about Penei Sewell. So what makes Penei Sewell so good? And right now it's kind of been a narrative surrounding out there that, him missing, this past season and not having that film is kind of, hurting his draft stock a little bit. But I kind of, I disagree with that. I really think he's a freak of an athlete on the offensive line. And, he's one of those guys that you're talking about in the trenches that Mario Cristobal is recruiting. So could you just take a deep dive and tell our audience how good is Penei Sewell?
Okay, so a couple things on Penei. First and foremost, it's all about family. The dude comes from an incredible family. Moms, pops, unbelievable. Dad is crazy. His whole family is super connected, and these guys are very, very good players, okay? Joe Salavea is like an uncle to him, and Joe Salavea, the defensive line coach. So Joe had a real deep connection early on. Okay. But Panay is incredible talent. Okay. This guy was not a 5-star. Okay. So he was not as highly recruited as maybe some other guys. And maybe offensive linemen don't get the same kind of hype. But he was an absolute, from day one, a legit player. Oregon's offensive line his freshman year was the most veteran offensive line that we've ever had. We had guys who had came in together as redshirt freshmen, or freshmen, and then they played together as redshirt freshmen all the way to senior year. And these guys, all these guys went to the NFL, and including one guy who didn't, who I thought was going to go for sure, Dallas Warmack, who I thought was one of the best guards in the country. I couldn't believe he didn't get drafted. But we're talking about some great players, guys who are in the NFL right now. And so what we had was this unit. Well, one of those guys could have been that starter. So what you had was you had 5 guys. They were all seniors. Panay came in as a freshman and took the left tackle position. Ooh. As a freshman on a team that had, so you had this other guy, Brady Alelo, who is, again, all these guys went to the NFL. And he comes into this team as a freshman and starts as the left tackle. Doesn't allow a sack and doesn't have a penalty. He went 2 years, I think, with 1 penalty. And it was like it wasn't. This guy was a dominator. And then you start putting the film on, and a lot of people don't really watch offensive linemen when they go through the game. They'll see it maybe 2 or 3 weeks later when they have some sort of a video clip or something of some guy destroying somebody in the open field. This dude did it every other play. He would get on the second level and just dominate. He's so big, he's so fast, but he doesn't feel big. When you stand next to him, he looks like a normal person. He does not look like a giant, but he is huge. And he is so skilled in his feet. But I'm telling you, this whole family's good. Every one of the 4 brothers played D1 football. Okay, including his younger brother, Noah Sewell, last year, who was the starting middle linebacker as a freshman, making the calls. So our linebacker the year before, Isaac Slade-Matitia, he moved over to the wheelback, and the freshman took over making the calls in the middle. So, and this is, this family is just so dynamic and highly rooted in their culture. American Samoa came over to Utah during the some of the guys' high school run. Panay came over when he was in middle school. And does
he have a brother in Utah?
Yes. Yes.
For the Utes? Yeah.
Yes. Who was just killing it. Yeah, number 29. Anyway, it's just such a cool family story, and the way that they are connected in with their family and their relations of their friends in the NFL and everything else. You can tell this is just, and Panay is probably the best of them, but I think maybe Noah is going to be even better. This guy is unreal. Panay at his position, I think, is the best, but I think Noah is going to be the most dynamic football player. He is unreal. I mean, as a freshman, this guy is a game changer. Panay was a sophomore and won the Outland Trophy as a sophomore. He was the best offensive lineman in the country. Again, it's absurd to kind of say these things. Now, I had conversations with a couple of these guys that when they were in that transition period of thinking whether they're going to transfer or opt out, go to the NFL or whatever, or not play this year, the key game was the Ohio State game. That's the only game where they were going to put film on tape that counted for the NFL. So outside of that game, it really wasn't going to matter. Having film against USC or UCLA, which UCLA had probably the best defensive line in the Pac-12 this year for us, but that's not going to count that much. They needed the film against Ohio State, and as soon as that game got canceled, guys like Javon Holland, Brady Breeze, they're like, we're done. We got something else to do. And Panay Sewell is literally just one freak play around a guy rolling his ankle or rolling his knee, doing something damage that's just not worth it. And he's ready to go now. He could have played in the NFL as a sophomore in college.
Wow.
Maybe he's not an impact player, but he's a grown man.
That's saying a lot right there. That's really saying a lot.
It is.
But just like we mentioned earlier, we had Jordan Scott on, definitely a friend of the pod. What is your favorite Jordan Scott story out there that you have for us, Ryan?
Well, he came in as a freshman All-American So I mean, this guy came in as a load. He came in, I think, at 340, maybe even higher, and he was not. If you want to talk about Penei Sewell being not looking like a big guy, Jordan Scott looked like a big guy, right? And Jordan is like 6'1", Penei is like 6'6". So, no, Jordan was very large in the uniform. He was one of those guys that you see. Every team's got one or two of those guys that are like, damn. But he held the gap, and he let his linebackers work. We had a guy, Troy Dye, one of the best linebackers we've ever had at U of O, just absolutely eat on the daily because of Jordan in front of him. So, you know, if you know football and you watch it from the line perspective, you know, sometimes that defensive tackle does not get the accolades that he deserves as he's standing 2 or 3 guys up. But this is a guy that was an absolute game changer. Had some really key moments. Always wanted to put more pressure on the quarterback and never really could. Possibly because of maybe his size or whatever, but he's still very fast. You know, his size is not, he's not a slow player. He would chase quarterbacks down and whatnot, but it just, their defense didn't put that much pressure on from the middle. Their pressure all came off the edge and came through linebackers and blitzes. So he was never really asked to do that, even though he personally wanted more sacks. But no, the Washington game up there in the rain, Herbert's year, he's very close with Justin Herbert. Brady Breeze is a guy who's like really almost like family to him. He was the guy that kind of introduced him to Oregon, and Jordan just has a great deal. He went to Paris 2 summers in a row. You know, I mean, you know, and it was painting, you know, underneath the Eiffel Tower. He's just such a unique guy. I'm so happy for him. I talk with him all the time on Instagram. We are constantly talking back and forth. I try to promote, you know, his buddy's got a little clothing brand. I try to promote that and everything. And just, he's just such a great individual. I truly believe that he will make a difference to any team that picks him up. And I think that teams, or the NFL, will definitely sleep on him. I could see him not even getting picked up and being a free agent. I could see that, and him just having a fantastic career. Or I could see him maybe going late rounds, but I definitely think that the NFL is going to sleep on him for sure.
Well, Robert did a great segment with him. They got together. We called it In the Trenches, where he went through and it was like play by play, and Jordan was basically giving his take on what happened on this play. Because you're right, those guys do get overlooked, and that's Jordan was even saying that. We're like, let's call out, let's do some film session, let's do a film session on it. So we got a film session out there. Oregon Ducks fans, check it out with Jordan Scott, In the Trenches. It's out there on YouTube, hosted by Robert with Jordan. So let's look ahead at the 21. Sometimes you could have the best team ever, but if your schedule sucks, it might not, the stars might not align for you at times. Yeah. It's any program. Schedules matter. I'm a big proponent of that. So I saw you called the non-conference slate, you called it green light, yellow light, red light, which I loved because it's Stony Brook, Fresno State, and at Ohio State. So there's your traffic light right there for you, folks. I like that. I like that comparison. But you talked about guys dropping out because of the loss of the Ohio State game. But how much of a bummer was that to lose that trip to Eugene for that Buckeyes trip to Eugene last year? And granted, everything was a bummer last year, so I guess that's kind of a dumb question. But like, how anticipated was that game in Eugene last year? And any word on when the Buckeyes will be making a return trip to Eugene? Because I read Gene Smith, Ohio State athletic director, he made a comment. He's like, we'll probably know by the 3rd week of March, which is about now. Yeah. So I haven't heard anything on it yet. Have you?
Well, what I first heard was 2032. So set your calendars now, because that'll be fun. Okay.
2032.
When my son is having his 2nd kid. Anyway, yeah, no, that was beyond. I mean, if you want to talk about COVID, you know, people were talking last year that Oregon got gifted because of COVID. Well, you know, to play all the games is a gift just in COVID last year, you know, but right. Like with situation with the Washington game and everything else, Oregon last spring had the best women's basketball team we've ever had, completely canceled. They were going to win. We thought we were going to win the tournament. Our best player we've ever had, total game changer. And then our basketball team, I was in Vegas when it got shut down. The basketball team was the number one team. Peyton Pritchard now playing for the friggin' Boston Celtics. It's like, and here we are. It's like we had both those canceled. We didn't even get to see the guys in the tournament, Pac-12 tournament. And then to have the whole thing go this whole summer and think, okay, what could be? And then they said, no, we're not doing non-conference. That was the first one, remember?
I think the governor, though, Oregon was one of the first states to say we're not going to have fans.
We're not going to have fans, but remember the Big Ten, the first move the Big Ten made was they said, we're not going to have non-conference games.
Non-conference.
And it was like, oh, man, that was like the first thing. And then it was like, okay, well, then everything started to spiral. Then they said they're going to cancel the whole season. Yeah. We said we're going to cancel the whole season. And, but we know the story. But that was brutal. And that was going to be an absolute game changer. Probably the biggest non-conference game ever at Autzen Stadium's history. Coming off of a Rose Bowl win, having your guys right in position where you want it to be. You have a new quarterback, but, you still have a bunch of guys returning. You got a great defense, which is not the norm at Oregon. And you had this great setup. It was all perfect. Well, play the thing out. We had the entire state on fire that week. Even if COVID hadn't happened, that game would have been canceled because of the fire.
The wildfires, right?
The wildfires were ridiculous. Like the worst air pollution in the world. Jeez. Like we couldn't even have it. So my point, and it was everywhere.
Dude, don't be disappointed. That's the most 2020.
That was that week.
That's the most 2020 explanation I've ever heard, Ryan.
Don't
worry. If it wasn't canceled during the COVID, it would have been canceled during the tragic wildfires.
Yeah.
That's a great answer for 2020. We can move on from that. But I think it's awesome the Ducks are fulfilling the return trip, though, and they're keeping that on the deck because these two programs, you love to see these types of non-conference matchups. And, oh, by the way, enough of this. I'm tired of these neutral site games. Like, I'm sorry, Oregon and Auburn, that's great that you guys play, but you're playing in Dallas. Who can play Oregon on the plains at Auburn? I want to see Auburn going up to Autzen. Like, I want to see these home and homes. And I think we're going that way in college football in general. And like, I think I saw a thing this year where this is Alabama's last official year. They don't have another one scheduled right now of doing it, and they're like the kings of that. Yeah. So I'm hoping to see more home and homes in general. But you guys have, obviously Pac-12 is one of those conferences that does the 9 Pac-12 games, 5 home. Arizona, Cal, Colorado, Washington State, Oregon State. Nothing scares me on the surface there. But 4 away. Stanford, UCLA, Washington, and Utah. So who did Oregon piss off in the Pac-12 scheduling department? That's what I want to know.
The Pac-12 does no one and none of their champions any favors. They put us on these games on a Friday night on the short week, Thursday night games, terrible time. Oh, it's brutal. The non-conference, just to go real quickly on for just a second about the home and homes. Home and homes are great, and that's what Oregon wants. We've actually scheduled a bunch of them, and then the other team would cancel, and then we would be left with this open date, and that's why they put those together, because both teams would have an open date. The Jerry's World opening thing is way easier to schedule than anything else. And it can be scheduled fairly late. Now, with COVID, hopefully, they learn they don't have to schedule these games 15 years in advance. We can do it like we could do it like next year if we needed to, right? Yeah. But there was a time frame where the Pac-12 actually was trying to align with the Big Ten and do a home and home series with all the Big Ten schools and all the Pac-12 schools.
Like basketball, Big 12 or Big 10, and Pac-12 challenge.
Exactly. And Oregon actually did the first part of it with Michigan State. We had a home and home with Michigan State. Yep. And so I love the fact that we did a home and home with Ohio State, and everybody loved that. But going forward, I would love to see, like you said, home and home with SEC or Big 12 or even ACC. But they don't want to travel, I think. They don't want to come out here. I think that's the bigger thing.
So talking, not to inject Florida into every conversation, but Florida is probably the most guilty of major programs down here. There was... When Missouri joined the conference and they played at Missouri, it was the furthest north they had traveled, like or outside of like Kentucky in like 30 years. They had a game at Syracuse, but they just don't schedule games. There's years where Florida has 10 games in the state.
Yeah, we don't travel out of the state.
There's not, you don't even leave the state that much with Florida. Just the way the schedule can work sometimes. But new athletic director, he's been there 4 years, Scott Strickland, with the playoff pressure and everything. these SEC games with playing the FCS opponents and stuff, those days are kind of going by the wayside. Florida's actually got home and homes with Cal, Arizona State, and Colorado right now. I would love to see an Oregon home on home at some point.
We would too.
I think the playoff is putting pressure. The playoff committee wants to see these games, and I can't wait to see more of them. And I'm so glad that Oregon is not trying to weasel their way out of this and we'll just do a home and home in 2032 and 33. No, I'm so glad that they're doing this with Ohio State this year. But the road schedule, though, Ryan,
brutal.
Ohio State, Stanford, UCLA. Because, by the way, UCLA, for those of you who are not big Pac-12 fans, I know Chip Kelly's been kind of a disappointment out there overall, but they kind of woke up last year. Washington and Utah, all tough places to play.
Yeah, and Utah at the end of the year. I mean, if you could pick a worse time to go to Salt Lake City, it's the end of November.
Yeah.
I mean, Stanford's always tough to play at. It's not because of the crowd. There's like nobody there. The COVID crowd looks kind of like the regular crowd. It's all Duck fans for the most part. Arizona at home is a great opener because I think Arizona is probably the worst team in the Pac-12 right now.
Need a minute.
And just to get things warmed up at home, I think it gets the Pac-12 slate started in a pretty good note, which I think is important. Go down to Stanford, hopefully pick up a win at Stanford. I think they can play pretty well down there. Cal at home is going to be tough. Cal beat us last year. Cal always plays tough. And, at Eugene, I'm just hoping we're going to have fans. I'm thinking it's 50%. They just said they're going to open it up a little bit. They're going to start to open things up. So hopefully by that time it gets to that point. But, dude, UCLA down there is a hyped game for the Ducks. That's a game that I'm not that worried about because the Ducks love to play down in Southern California. That is a huge – that if they could have one game on their schedule that they're concerned with, that's the game. The game that scares me is at Washington because at Washington, November – dude, anything can happen up there. Washington hates us. Washington on Twitter is insane. I mean, there's good people, don't get me wrong, but like, dude, we see some crazy things from them. Like, they're a passionate fan base, and to them, they think of them as like, they think they're like USC. They've had national championships, they've done this, that, and the other, and they look at Oregon and they just hate the fact that Oregon has had the amount of success they've had, one, but that the fact that they also haven't cashed it in. So they hold that against Oregon heavy. So I tend to think that this Washington game is going to be a big one. Washington did not have the season they wanted to last year, and the way it ended last year was absolutely bizarre with the fact that Washington had to play Oregon to see who would win the North to go play the Pac-12 championship, and Washington couldn't play because of COVID. So the fact that they had that game canceled, Washington thinks they would have won. So this whole season, this whole offseason, they're like, no, we would have been the real champion. You guys didn't deserve it.
You were going to hear that though when that happened.
Oh, yeah. Duck fans think they would have won that game, no problem. They came out and played a great game against USC the next week, and the Ducks were ready to play.
Yeah.
With a limited roster. The Ducks had the limited roster just as much as anybody else. They were just playing. But Washington had lost their entire offensive line and defensive line because of COVID. How do you play with another line?
No.
So I don't buy into the hatred and everything else. I think it's funny, and I got a lot of respect for Washington. Washington's a great program and a great setting, and that's always a great place to go. But if it's late and it gets wet and weird up there, anything can happen.
So we'll go through and get your predictions on the season, like early prediction. But obviously, I'm going to ask you one offensive, one defensive question. So offensively, the guy we all want to know about, freshman quarterback Ty Thompson coming in, forced to transfer from the starter from last year on the spot. But I mean, he's graduate transfer, so I think maybe that was blown out of proportion a little bit. But I mean, guy must have some talent coming in there if they're pretty much at a school like Oregon handing him the keys from day one.
Yeah, well, I don't think they're going to hand him the keys right off the jump because you still have Anthony Brown in the building. So
are we thinking he's going to start?
He is
who's starting in the horseshoe?
Oh, I think it's Brown.
Wow,
I think it's Brown. Okay. He's the established starter. At the end of the year last year, he took the snaps that counted the most, goal line snaps, fourth down snaps. Now, don't get me wrong. Last year, I thought we'd see AB before the end of the year. I thought we'd see him in the first week or so.
Right,
Shuck came out and played fairly well the first couple weeks and then just lost it. I mean, it wasn't that he played terrible, but he didn't have the confidence to run it, and either it was play calling that put him in that position or whatnot. COVID was such a weird year last year. It could have been a variety of different things, but he just didn't have it. And at the end of the year, they had pretty much switched gears and given the keys to Anthony Brown. So it's his job to lose, in my opinion.
Wow.
He'll come in. He's a graduate transfer
Boston
who
College.
kept another year because of COVID. So he's like 23. He's well veteran. I think at Ohio State, I would rather give it to the senior to run that team than the true freshman. But you're also jumping two other players who were very highly recruited. One is the kid Robbie Ashford, we talked about earlier, plays on the baseball team. He looks the part for sure, and he's from Alabama. And then the other one is Jay Butterfield, who's a great passing quarterback, one of the highly touted passing quarterbacks, whose dad is an NFLer. So
we might not see Thompson at all this year based on how you're
or if you do, then the other guys aren't living up to their expectations, or you have injuries. And my dad is always harping on the idea that you're one play away. Yep. And so you need to have guys in your room that can all play. I mean, we've seen years we go to the fifth string quarterback. So
that's true.
But at the same time, if the quarterback stays healthy, he doesn't come out of the game. And so it's going to be hard to get these kids minutes. So a lot of these guys, they didn't have the year counted against them last year. So it's not like it's a red shirt. Nobody redshirted last year because it didn't even count against them or anything. And I think these guys got a lot of reps. And I think going into this year, it's going to be really difficult, in my mind, to see the freshmen jump those other three guys. I think those other three guys might have a look first. Now, let's talk about Ty Thompson for a second.
Yeah.
This guy could be the next big thing for sure. He looks beyond the part.
Give people a comp who haven't seen him. We got a comp for us.
Well, he's very fleet of foot. He's very light on his feet. He kind of reminds me,
good guy, right? 6'4".
Yeah, he's tall, right? He kind of has the Marcus Mariota build when he was young, where he's just thin. He can run the ball, but he's not a running quarterback. But he's a winner, man. You go back and put the tape on, and he just is an absolute winner. They won the state championship with this last drive where he makes the last plays. I mean, he's a gamer. And so,
where's he from?
He's also from Phoenix, Arizona area.
Yep.
And so, man, it's just a unique situation where every year, because of the recruiting level, you're going to start bringing in kids who are comparable as freshmen to some of the other guys you're going to have at juniors and seniors, because every year, technically, you're getting better and better quarterbacks. And this kid rated out as one of the best quarterbacks in the country. So I would love to see it, but I also like to temper expectations sometimes on the young kids, because I think there is such a hype with recruiting right now, and people spend so much energy on recruiting that they think that as soon as the kid gets there, he's going to take over. This is not high school football. Well, you're playing against
You're right.
dudes.
You're totally right. Usually that's not the case. But
you're playing against dudes. So
I gotta tell you, I've heard like reporters in college football, national reporters that I respect, talk about Ty Thompson like he's got the job already. So you're educating me here. Like I really thought that he was going to be the guy, but I tell you the truth. I mean, Anthony Brown played good quarterback for Boston College for a long time. Unusual fit at Oregon, though, right? It's exactly run Oregon's offense out under Steve Adazio.
Yeah, I mean, so I tend to think what it looked like for me was you saw Justin Herbert as a junior who they said he could have gone out his junior year, okay, into the NFL. He stayed that one more year. What that did was it kind of delayed the rest of that quarterback room at Oregon, because a lot of kids would leave during that year. You're not going to stay. Okay, the starting quarterback's going to stay. I'm not going to stay around. Well, Tyler Shuck did stay around. So we really didn't know what we had with Tyler because he didn't really get the playing time. Well, when Herbert stayed that extra year, he became the guy. I mean, I don't think he'd be the rookie of the year in the NFL had he not stayed that one extra year. I think he gained a lot from that one extra year, just body type. But in that position, that's when Anthony Brown looked over and said, well, they got to replace Herbert. There's nobody else there. So when these guys, because he's in the same group as like Jamie Newman, the Ducks wanted Jamie Newman as well. And so when those guys that are those grad transfers are looking at who is the best team with the open position that I can go compete for. Well, he went to this position and COVID happened. So it was like Anthony didn't even really get that much of a chance to get his foot in the door early because all the COVID shut down all throughout the whole spring. No, everybody's at home. And so then in the offseason, they start kind of playing together a little bit. But the only guy who has any sort of rapport with anybody is Tyler. And because he's been on the team, he's been running the scout team before and everything else, right? So I think Anthony Brown, it took him a long time to kind of acclimate. But at the end of the year, he made some really, really good plays for the Ducks. Like in key moments, came in during fourth down plays, during goal line plays, and made really smart decisions with the ball. So I tend to think he can operate the offense. I don't think you're going to see him be the next thing, but I think that he's going to be able to be a strong enough player at that point to not screw it up. And then hopefully you get something out of these freshmen and sophomores that maybe if Anthony Brown doesn't pan out next year, that you could put those kids in halfway through the year, like you did with Herbert, and get at least the toes in the water his freshman year to maybe have a big career.
Sounds like you got some options in 2021 here. Last question before we get your predictions. Andy Avalos gone. Boise State hires a defensive coordinator. Bring in Tim DeRuyter. What's the expectations on the defensive side of the ball? You're obviously losing a few players on the defensive side too. But hey, I mean, it sounds like people are pretty fired up about DeRuyter coming in, though.
Yeah, the defense was a real problem for Helfrich. And that's one of the other big reasons why I think Helfrich went down. The defense was just one of the worst in the country. Jim Leavitt brought it back to a little bit more respectable level. Andy Avalos came in with a really good defensive team, really good players. Players who are going to go play in the NFL. Javon Holland, Thomas Graham, great defensive cornerbacks, good linemen, Jordan in the middle, KT off the edge as a freshman. He was blessed as a defensive coordinator. He had some really good guys to work with on that side of the ball. But he was also pretty creative, and he changed up the scheme a little bit and was pretty creative over time. But last year, the defense really took a step back. Last year, actually, we thought the defense was going to be the side of the ball to really watch, and it really took a step back. And it was still kept the Ducks in games for sure. The offense sputtered a little bit last year, but we're excited about the change. But there's a lot of Duck fans who really, there's a coach who left, Keith Hayward, who actually went to OSU, but he had worked himself into the position of basically being the co-defensive coordinator or the safeties coach. He was the safeties coach, but he also kind of worked as co-defensive coordinator. He actually went to the Cal Bears and took the job that Tim DeRuyter had. And the Cal Bears have a bunch of guys that are Oregon connections because Wilcox is from Oregon.
Justin Wilcox, right?
Peter Sermon is the defensive coordinator there. He was an Oregon linebacker. So the Cal Bears had a co-defensive coordinator situation, and we were like, okay, co-defensive coordinator, let's take Peter Sermon because we know Peter Sermon is a Duck fan. So we're happy with Tim DeRuyter. I think it'll be fine, but I think there might have been some other choices that may have made Duck fans happier. And for me personally, I would have liked to see Keith Hayward go because I know personally him and his relationship with the players is really next level. And I don't know if DeRuyter has that same sort of connection. DeRuyter seems like a little bit more old school, militaristic sort of approach, but maybe we just need an eyes in the booth that's going to do what we need to do defensively, because if Oregon has a good defense, they're competitive nationally. That's how it's been for the last 20 years. If Oregon puts together a good defense with the good offense, then we are the best team in our conference. The years where Oregon suffered defensively, it just becomes an average team.
Hey, and you know what? That's what we're seeing. That those recruiting classes come in. They'll have plenty of tools in the toolbox. We know that. But let's go back to the schedules here. Expectations. I want two angles. And the first one, I want you to be a boring realist. Give me your most sober take on this schedule with 5 road games, just to repeat: Ohio State, Stanford, UCLA, Washington, and Utah. That alone, I mean, that's concerning stretch right there.
I mean, I think the most conservative, I think, would be like an 8-win season. 8-9 wins is still a pretty good season. You're in a bowl. You're in a bowl game. It maybe doesn't reach the expectations that a lot of the Duck fans have, but it's a pretty normalized expectation. I think Duck fans would be fairly pissed at 6-7 wins, just because of the level of the recruits. I think people are expecting the recruits to pay off to wins, and I think that maybe doesn't always happen, like we see with USC, we see with other schools, that maybe you got to have the coaching with the recruits. So I think conservatively, 8 wins. Like you said, there's some tough road wins there. I don't think you're going to beat Ohio State to start the year. I would love to see them really close in the first half, make it respectful or whatever, but I don't know. Ohio State's such a behemoth. So I think they do beat the other two. I mean, Stony Brook. I had to look up Stony Brook and just to see where the heck this.
Strong
I
Island,
knew where
right?
it was, but just to see how long have they even had a program? Do they even offer scholarships? Like, what is their history? But I tend to think the way the Pac-12 works right now is I think that USC and Arizona State are the two best schools in the South. And Oregon avoids both of them in the schedule. So if you're talking about like what schedule works best for the schools, I think Oregon avoids the schools in the South that they want to avoid. They're going to have to play one of the LA schools. I would rather play UCLA in the regular season and maybe play USC in the championship game.
Sure.
I think that would be perfect because I think, again, that you got to have that most important game at the end to get all those votes and everything else. If you're in that position to be able to put yourself at the best position going forward for the best bowl. But Utah scares the heck out of me every year. I think Kyle Whittingham is a really good football coach. I think they have a really solid program. They put guys in the NFL as well. They have a lot of depth on their team. They have a lot of guys that are Mormon that go on their mission, come back 2 years older, some serious grown men like we talked about. I just think that it's going to be, maybe 1 or 2 games that Oregon's going to have to look at. Washington and Utah. I think Oregon beats UCLA at UCLA, and I think Oregon can win every other game. So it's just, to me, it's like 3 losses. If you get to 2 losses, if you're 10-2, I think you're really having a good look at it.
So that's the green and yellow tinted glasses you're putting on.
Well, the super hyped fans, they think they're going to win everything. There's fans that are like, we're going to the horseshoe and we're coming back with a win. They're like, it's just like Michigan. I was like, no, it's not. Michigan got beat by App State the week before. This is not the same team.
Michigan football was not cooking the way Ohio State football is right now.
Highly recruited or highly ranked.
On the way down.
Highly ranked, though. Yeah. Those were the days where it's like
we
they start
didn't
the
know
year.
that was the beginning of an end of an era at Michigan.
Yeah.
We didn't know
that
at
was
the time.
That was the end of Lloyd Carr, correct?
Yeah. That was the beginning of end of a lot of things at Michigan. So, like, winning football on a regular basis, too.
But I also think the Pac-12 is a good football conference. I think that it gets a bad rap for being on the West Coast. It doesn't get the sort of coverage. We talked about that a little bit earlier. They talk about it being soft. I think there's good football played out here, and I think that consistently every single week there's always crazy stuff. They talk about Pac-12 After Dark. There's always crazy stuff that happens out here that's unexplainable sometimes. And you get games that are great matchups, like Oregon-Stanford historically was, in my mind, one of the best top 10 games of the year to take a look at during the Chip Kelly era and everywhere else going forward. Well, now you look at the Oregon-Washington game. Oregon-Washington's played for 100 years, and I think they only played maybe 2 or 3 times where both have been ranked. So it's this idea of like to have them both be good at the same time makes it even more amplified. So I tend to think this little matchup we've had with Washington the last 3 years and then putting the COVID last year, the Washington game is going to be the game of the year.
Ryan, this was phenomenal. This is the type of content we're looking to create for our fans out there. We love this, and like I love doing deep dives on these programs. So if you are not an Oregon Ducks fan, there's no way you didn't learn a ton about Oregon football tonight. So, I mean, even if you are an Oregon Ducks fan, there's no way you didn't learn something about Oregon football tonight, man. You have a crazy knowledge of the program. You give it in a great way, and let people know where they can check you out, Ryan.
Yeah, SportsChat503. I'm on Twitter. I don't do that much on Twitter. I'm on Instagram or whatever, but I'm just a normal guy. I'm a family man. I got a wife and a kid. I'm in my basement. I'm not in my mom's basement. I'm in my own basement. I own multiple houses, people. I'm not trying to be on that level. Come on now.
Your wife lets you decorate like that, not your mom.
Yeah, I'm in a literal cave. I mean, I can touch the wall in front of me. The other wall is about 10 feet over there. But yeah, I've got the Super Bowl Shuffle on the framed album on the wall. I've got the Ken Griffey Jr. poster. from his rookie year. I mean, I got some old school stuff in here just as much, but you got to understand, I'm multiple generation, U of O. My whole family's dedicated to this. There's a lot of people out here, and the rest of my house doesn't look like this, but my little man cave does. And my boy's room does. My boy's room is even more ducked out. It's got everything up there. Amazing. So
that's awesome.
It's all for the love, and I just love college football. We all do. I love college sports. I love all sports. I mean, but it's just so fun to see Oregon football be relevant. I think that's the most important thing is, I've done my little sports chat thing on the internet where I basically do every single week. I talk about the Duck game, I talk about the Pac-12 game, and I talk about the National. Every single week throughout the whole season. I go to as many games as possible. I used to always film at the games. I don't know if they're going to let me do that anymore, but I used to break down a lot of film. I go to the games. I try to have as much access to the program, and I just try to just talk about the Ducks, about the Pac-12, because I think, again, there's just not that much access to it. You go look on YouTube. There's a bunch of guys down there from the South. They love to talk trash or anything else. I'm not about that. I'm just here to talk sports, whatever, do our thing, have fun, drink a beer or whatever, and watch the game, man.
That's awesome, man. Ryan. We definitely got to have you on, during the season to get you back on, talk some Oregon Duck football.
I don't know, man. Preseason might do a preseason.
Yeah. Preseason would be great. Yeah, and even for Pac-12, just because I cover. I mean, I don't cover. I try to watch everything. I'm just that's what we all do. So yeah, I would love anytime. Love to chat. I'm always open. So appreciate you.
We're friends. We try to promote everyone. We definitely have our. We grew up watching SEC football down here, but we definitely we like to appreciate football around the country, man. A lot of good stuff out there. Oregon Ducks. A lot of changes in 2021. Going to be an exciting season out there in Eugene. Hey, this has been another episode of American Football Stories podcast. Thanks again to our guest, Ryan Winter. Check him out at SportsChat503 on YouTube. And we will send it out with a word from our sponsor, CoachMate. American Football Stories is brought to you by CoachPaint. CoachPaint is a great tool that allows us to add graphics to player highlight clips similar to the graphics you see on TV. CoachPaint offers the ability to clearly tellustrate video while increasing retention of information in a shorter amount of time. Up your game with CoachPaint today.
Thank you for listening to American Football Stories podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, American Football Stories. We are working to grow our network on YouTube and would love to have you subscribe. You can find us also on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter at American FB Story, and on our website, AmericanFootballStories.com. I am Robert Parker. My co-host is Nick Knudsen. This has been another episode of American Football Stories.